Welcome to the Additive Wax demo today. Additive wax is kind of my least favorite to do. I think it's because I grew up in the 70s with the designs that were just kind of blobby pieces of wax, and I like structure. But I do need to introduce you to this because I've had a lot of students do some really beautiful things with it. I just want to talk about the different materials and how you work with them, and then probably take a break and then show actually doing some of that. But the first thing I just want to share with you is that there is sheet wax. And sheet wax is one of those things where it can be paper thin or it can be a little bit thicker. And I find a lot of students just taking their X-Acto knife and cutting a strip, and then bending it around and making it a ring. And what I would say to you is why not just use metal instead? The other thing that I find is that people will take their waxes and they'll start like stacking them on top of each other and then hoping that it all stays together when they invest it. And the problem with that is that these are just going to come right apart. And in the vacuum process, we're going to be doing about 28 psi's. So that's going to allow the investment to get in and break into it. So one of the things that I've done with the sheet waxes is I've dipped it in some hot water, and then it becomes really malleable. And I've played around with like making roses and things like that, and I'll be demonstrating that and showing you an example of that process. But when this is wet, or when this is hot, you can actually pull and stretch and roll with it. And then if you are going to do layering, just remember that you've got to go in and you've got to melt these edges together so that the investment doesn't break in there and cause your casting not to work. So this is so thin that in casting just this by itself, you'd probably have problems with it. But I was thinking about it again today with us all wearing masks, is it would be fun to try to, with this, to make a crinkled mask like the healthcare people work. So those are the different waxes. Another thing I do want to talk about when I'm doing wax work in my studio, I always put down a clean piece of paper, because if I set this down and I pick up some metal filings in here, it's going to get embedded in here, and then it's not going to burn out and you're going to have pitting in it. So you want to work in a clean environment. The other thing that I like to do is I like to work off of a piece of glass because I can easily scratch off the excess that happens, and then I find that my pieces don't stick to the glass like they do the paper that's on here. The other ones I want to share with you is these are additive wax, and it comes in like half round, little tiny stuff to work with. And one of the things that I did that I experimented with, and I'll show you a sample of, is that I took a piece of plaster and I carved it into like a capsule, and then I wrapped the wire around it for a body and made a bell form. So when you're working with this wax, you also need to know that you can't just stick them together, that you actually need to melt the two pieces of wax together. The other thing you should know is that this additive wax is really flexible, which is really lovely. And it melts at a much lower temperature than the carving wax. So this is something that I just quickly put together. I wrapped it around the mandrel, and then where the joint was, I just started adding wax onto it to build it back up. This does not carve as well. So usually when you're doing an additive wax, you don't want to think about going back in and trying to clean it up with a file or something like that. But what you can do is you can take, this is kind of a neat mandrel. You can see that somebody's put some masking tape on it to make it slide off a little bit easier. But this is nice because then you can take and rotate it. But for making something, what you can do is you can just literally wrap it around the shape. And then with your blade, you can come in and cut it. But once again, I'm going to say to you, why do this if why not just make it out of metal? And then at that point, we can melt this back together again. But I've found that I don't have a lot of luck getting that joint just to look clean. I would make that out of round wire, but it gives me a surface to start working off of. So these additive waxes, they're softer, they melt at a lower temperature. It's real easy to put your fingernail mark into it. So one of the ways that I like to use it is I like to carving wax, make a surface, and then go in and pretend like this is a cake and that I'm decorating the top of that. And so I can slide this on the mandrel and do the same thing with that and do some additive stuff, okay? So for me, I've always found that the most interesting things are things where you combine materials. So if you're doing a carved and an additive, it's gonna probably be more interesting than just one or the other. And I also think that when you cast metal and you fabricate and you put those parts together, it can be really interesting too. So don't forget all your fabrication skills while you're doing this class. So one of the tools that we work with for melting this wax and building it up is what's called an alcohol lamp. And I have filled it up with denatured alcohol. I've had students use lamp oil, but lamp oil has scented stuff in it and coloring in it, and it creates a lot of soot. So the denatured alcohol is the best to use. I used to think this was a really safe tool to use, and I had a student come take my class and she had burns all down the side of her neck. And she had been using an alcohol lamp, kept it going, took the lid off, and went to fill it up, and it lit her hair on fire. To say the least, that was not a smart thing to do. I also had a student who was using it upright like this and was dripping a lot of wax down onto it, and then the glass broke. And I came over with a towel to throw over it, and this denatured alcohol burns really clear, and so the flame was about this high. I put the towel about like this, and then it set the towel on fire. So then another smart student dumped sand on it and cleaned it out. So these look really benign, but it is a lamp. When you work with it, you want to turn it on its side so that if you do drip any wax, it's going to not fall onto the glass piece there. I don't want to scare you with it, but the alcohol lamp is kind of the most basic way. There's also all kinds of hot wax pens that you can buy. We don't have many of them in the studio because of the cost, but this is what's called a max wax, and it has a little wire here, and then when you press on it, you can start seeing it smoking. So it gets hot, and it can actually just kind of burn through there. So the max waxes are nice for little kind of details. I put in Canvas a video of a guy using wire and making this really interesting structure, and he was using the max wax with it. I kind of like to work low tech, so what I would like to do is use the alcohol lamp and the paddle and show you a few techniques. Another tool I like is this, because we can make fake granulation with really tiny wire and melting little beads onto the top of this ring here. So I'd like to do that. The other thing I want to share with you is this hot wax pen is like a glue gun, except that it has wax in it, and they have 3 different colors of waxes, and they all have kind of different purposes. We used to have the book that came along with this, and that grew legs and walked away. So you can go in and look up the matte wax gun and then be able to read about it. But what I found is that the red wax has a tendency to be really lacy, and some of the other colors. But right now what I have in here is blue wax. So I'm going to drop the little cartridge in hopefully. Yep. And then the way that this works, and you can do this right on your wax, you can just start to create patterns with it. And can you see how quickly this melts and doesn't keep kind of the stringy wire length to it? So it kind of just melted down into itself. The red wax melts at a lower temperature and kind of stays more like what you're expecting to come off, but now this can be lifted off, and you can play around with this. I was never very good at cake decorating, so I have never really gotten good with this tool, but I have seen some students do some really amazing things. Another thing that you can do is you can do it right on this, and I can start to make a ring. And then I can let it cool for a moment, and then I could go back in and add areas to it and create a pattern. The blue wax is not great for this because it stays liquid longer, so it turns more into a blob than some of the others, but that's what we had in here for the moment. But you can see that you could really play around with this. And then once it's set up completely, takes a little bit of practice, but what I do is I kind of just try to break this to come loose. So you can see I'm kind of nudging it. And I'm so impatient. I'm so used to solder freezing right away. And with the additive wax, you have to be a little more patient. But now I can slip that off. I think you guys could do 100% better at designing something. But what I'd like you to do is have an opportunity to play with this and see what you can find. I highly recommend the red wax. So what we need to do now is finish up the blue wax, and then we can just put the red in there, and you're going to have a lot more detail happening on the carving process. But can you see already that we're going from real structure to really more organic stuff? And I think that's fine. I just aesthetically really like structure. So for me, I'm a little challenged with this process, but as an instructor, I feel it's really important that I share this with you because I've had a lot of students do some beautiful stuff. I want to do the additive process with you guys with the alcohol lamp. I'm going to need to grab that chair here to sit down. Even in COVID time, I need to sit down to do this. But I'm sitting down right here to the table. I'm going to take and I'm going to light my alcohol lamp. Maybe. Sometimes what you have to do is turn it upside down and let the denatured alcohol get to the end of the wick. These are typical jewelry ones, but I have found in antique stores some really beautiful alcohol lamps that are really beautiful shapes and everything, and they work the same way. The wick is just a piece of cotton rope, and sometimes we want to pull it up a little bit more to get more of a flame. And then I just want to show you a couple things about working with the additive wax. If I want to melt a little bit of wax and put it on something, I want to hold this paddle with the wax not being directly in the flame so that we don't burn it and put carbon into it. So you can see that this is melting down now. And once it becomes liquid, I can then tilt it right to the end. That piece dropped off, but I can go in and I can start adding more. And what you have to do is see how that's already molten. You're gonna just have to practice when it's time to lay it down or not that's on there. But you can build up got that a little hot. You can continue to build up surfaces and get some interesting patterns. You can also get your paddle hot enough to go back in to actually cut into your wax and then have a negative kind of space coming in there. So I really encourage people to take time to sit down with your alcohol lamp and play with some of this to see what you've got. I'm going to see if I can close this ring up. So I'm going to put it back on the mandrel. Going to make them touch each other, and my hand is right in your way. I should be left-handed. And I'm going to heat this tool up. Don't let it smoke. And then I'm going to come down and just touch and pinch it together. And just like with silver soldering, you can tell when the wax is sealed up because it's glossy and then it goes matte, kind of like solder does, but at a much lower temperature. And then I'm going to heat this and add a little bit more to the seam. And then what I always do is I get too excited and I let go before it's solid, and then it breaks apart. And then I'm going to hold it a little while longer, and then I just want to take, and if I want to build up some thickness, I can come in and just heat directly on this, and then I can add wax to this. And with littler pieces, you're going to get littler balls. It's kind of fun to just kind of play around with it. And then what's nice about this mandrel is I can turn it a little bit and work there again. So if you're a good cake decorator, this is going to be a really great process for you. Oops, did you see it was too cold then? So if I don't like that, I'll just scrape it off with my fingernail, and I'll come back in and add to it again. Okay. What I do want to show you guys is a process that a student of mine that taught at the high school in Ballard, she would make beautiful granules. And the way that she would do it is she would take the smallest wire that we have and then the smallest little pinpoint, and she would just get a little bit of it, and then she would hang it in there and let it melt down to the bottom. And then can you see I'm gonna let it hang, and then it touches down and it makes a little bead for you. And so it's a matter of heating it, getting it to hang, and then waiting until it's almost solidified. See, that one was too soon and it flattened out. Don't like that. Scrape it off. Try it again. And it really is just getting used to knowing the materials. Okay, so you can see that this is heating up. I love how it all, and then I'm just gonna let it hang, let it hang, let it hang, let it hang. I can see it's starting to not be as glossy, and I still was too soon. Okay, so what's happened is this stick has gotten hot, and so I don't need to have it in the flame as long. And then I need to hang it upside down and wait longer and be patient. There we go. So you can just go in. The other thing that you can do is you can heat this up. And I just roll it a little bit. This reminds me a little bit of glass blowing. And you can actually get it ready, and then you can draw with it a little bit and pull it. And if you don't like it, just scrape it off and then redo it. I'm going to wait for it to get a little bit more solidified. And what I'm looking for is it not to be as glossy. And you can kind of draw with it. So, none of this is very interesting, but if you play around with it, you are going to stumble across some interesting ways of doing an additive wax process. And like I said, it's like cake decorating, so you just got to practice a lot. And so I think for you, knowing about the alcohol lamp and knowing about the sheet wax and also the wire wax and the glue gun, those are kind of, or the wax gun, those are all kind of things that you can start playing with. And then see if you can figure out a way to really embellish your pieces that are there. So what I did find is that this wax doesn't carve very well. But I do know that one of the things I do like doing is just coming back in and adding stuff. And you really have nothing to lose, because if it drops off like that just did, no big deal. I can just go back in and I can just keep adding. And that one's not going to work, it was too cold. I can just keep going back in and adding to it, and then choosing to take it off. But it reminds me of putting sparkles on cupcakes. Or you can drag a line, create a little bit more, get it on there, and then take your tool and then pull it along. And I bet Erin's camera is going to give us some good details there that are on there. Okay. So I do apologize that I'm not that into this process, but I feel that it's really an important process in wax casting for you guys to know and to play with and experiment with. So just a couple of safety notes. When you're using the alcohol lamp, make sure that you turn it on its side. Make sure that you got clean paper wherever you're working. And then when you go to close it, we can't with our masks blow it out. So I'm going to turn it upside down and I'm going to drop that over the top and close it. Okay. And then when I'm done here, I want to put the alcohol back into this container, because otherwise it will evaporate and then we won't have any alcohol to use in the studio. So when you're through with your piece, do empty it, put the lid back on, set it like that. Make sure you put the lid back on the cap so it doesn't evaporate. And then it'll be available for us the next time around. Okay, anything else? Great.
Cool.